All right, welcome everyone. Today's article is going to be titled Clinical Evidence for GLP-1 Receptor Agonists in Alzheimer's Disease. This is a review, and it's written by Liang et al., Liang and colleagues, and this paper was published in 2024. So let's basically just touch on what this paper basically is about. So GLP-1 receptor agonists are kind of drugs like liraglutide, exenatide, lixisenatide, and semaglutide, more specifically Ozempic or Wegovy, could help treat Alzheimer's disease. We'll break down the 2024 systematic review, so it's super easy to understand. So first and foremost, what are GLP-1 receptor agonists? So GLP-1 receptor agonists are medications that copy a natural hormone made in your gut. Doctors mainly use them for type 2 diabetes, to lower blood sugar, and for significant weight loss. So if you know about Ozempic, you know that it's very, very important in diabetes and kind of maintaining BMI. So researchers also noticed something exciting. Your brain also has GLP-1 receptors. In lab and animal studies, these drugs reduce brain inflammation, they protect nerve cells, and improve energy use in the brain, and may fight harmful proteins. So this 2024 systematic review by Liang and colleagues looked at all clinical evidence for these drugs in people already diagnosed with Alzheimer's. They screened hundreds of studies and focused on the best ones, mostly small randomized trials using liraglutide and exenatide, lasting from a few months to up to a year and a half. So here's a little excerpt from the study and just a little idea of what GLP-1 is specifically. So this is a hormone that's usually produced in your gut, more specifically in the pancreas, and you have receptor agonists that are all across your intestines and also recently found inside your brain. And what it does is it controls blood sugar, weight loss, and also has some neuroprotective effects. Here's a little extra from the study. GLP-1 receptor agonists showed metabolic benefits such as lower body mass index, improving glucose levels, and may mitigate the decline in cerebral glucose metabolism and show enhanced blood-brain glucose transport capacity. So usually people who have Alzheimer's or dementia, they tend to have a much more reduced glucose metabolism capacity. So this drug has the capacity to kind of increase these options and sort of decrease the amount of symptoms that come from Alzheimer's disease or dementia. So let's just break down this study and how the review was done. So about more than 1,400 studies or papers were looked at. So 1,200 were removed, and a further 1,194 had to be excluded. And they basically came up with 6 specific studies that were specifically looking at GLP-1 and Alzheimer's disease. So from all that, from 1,400 studies, only 6 studies were studied in this review. And it's also important to note that only one reviewer was looking at the 6 papers and kind of taking the metadata and seeing what's important from it. So the review by Liang and colleagues looked at all the clinical evidence of these drugs in people already diagnosed with Alzheimer's. They screened hundreds of studies and focused on the best ones, mostly small randomized trials using liraglutide and exenatide, lasting from a few months to about a year and a half. So the big question, do these drugs clear the classic Alzheimer's proteins, amyloid plaques, and tau tangles? Unfortunately, there wasn't a significant effect. PET scans and spinal fluid tests showed little to no change in amyloid or tau levels compared to placebo. So unfortunately, there was no major change based on the placebo and the treatment group. And further, the second question is, do they improve thinking and memory? So cognitive tests like ADAS, COG, and MMSE showed no clear overall improvement. However, there were more hopeful signs. There was better blood sugar control and lower body weight. One study showed the drugs helped prevent the usual drop in brain glucose metabolism, and there was possible slower brain shrinkage in memory areas like the hippocampus. Unfortunately, side effects did exist, but they were mostly mild stomach issues, and this is common for people who have diabetes. So why do we see these mixed results? These studies were small and relatively short. Alzheimer's develops slowly, so bigger and longer trials are needed. Newer drugs like semaglutide are now being tested in large phase 3 studies. The drugs might work best early on or in people who also have diabetes or metabolic problems. So what we have to see is we have to look at more longitudinal trials to kind of have a better understanding or perspective of these drugs because they're still relatively new. And if more trials are done, bigger sample sizes, more aggregation of genders, we can kind of come up with a better picture of whether this is a good study or not. But as so far, it's just there's not enough data to give us a clear conclusion of whether this is good or bad. So here's just a little illustration that was helped by ChatGPT that kind of explains exactly what this study was looking at. Here we had Ozempic is kind of an idea of what these drugs are about. Essentially, they didn't use semaglutide, they use other types because the ones that they used, liraglutide and exenatide, were able to cross the blood brain barrier. Ozempic is not able to do that. That's why they were just looking at that. So we know GLP-1 hormone is something that's produced in the pancreas. There's receptors within inside the brain, and it promotes weight loss, controls blood sugar, also reduces inflammation. How much studies? 6 were the ones were used in this trial, so you can see it was very biased. Human evidence has been mixed. Studies did not show significant effect or reducing amyloid plaques or tau tangles. That wasn't that much different. Here we have cognition and brain health. The cognitive test, memory, thinking showed no major improvement. Nothing really changed here. Brain structures, less brain shrinkage in some areas was found. Slow volume loss in hippocampus and other regions. Low blood sugars, weight loss, and also improved metabolic health. Side effects were mild. So cognition, metabolism, and safety summary. So memory, thinking, no significant improvement. Brain glucose metabolism is better preserved versus placebo. Brain structure, less shrinkage in some regions. Metabolic benefits, so there was lower blood sugar, weight loss, metabolic health, and that's kind of important to take into account because when you have a more controlled metabolic instance, you tend to have less disease. So even if you didn't have dementia or you had another type of neurodegenerative disorder, having a reduced metabolic uh, inflammation can kind of reduce the amount of symptoms that you're going to get from it. So at least he was able to at least help with the metabolic benefits, which are still important in reducing the burden of the disease. So the limitations for the studies are, unfortunately, the studies were very small. We only had 6 studies. They were short in duration. They only lasted up to 18 months, so we need more longitudinal studies. They only used liraglutide and exenatide. There was 3 that were proposed, but the only ones that were used in these studies, which were only 6 of, liraglutide and exenatide. We need more heterogeneity in the population. We need, so for the future, they need more early studies, ongoing trials, and we can find some better answers that way. Unfortunately, there was no major changes in plaques, no clear cognitive improvement, but the only thing that could be taken apart from this is the fact that there was a promising brain metabolism protection. So this kind of is more neuroprotective than neuropreventive, and there's definitely more research that's needed. Bottom line, GLP-1 drugs don't yet show strong direct effects on Alzheimer's, plaques, or cognition, but they have exciting neuroprotective and metabolic benefits worth studying further. And further, as I always say, it's always important to just talk to your doctor and don't seek any treatment from these videos. It's just more like an informative type of format here. All right, that concludes the video for this week. Hope you have a good one and take care. Please like and subscribe. Thanks.